My name is Robin Silvestri, and welcome everybody. I'm a trustee here in the Village of Babylon, and one of my duties is to run the Nathaniel Conklin House. I head up the steering committee over here at the Nathaniel Conklin House. And tonight, together with the Babylon Village Historical Society, and we are honored to welcome once again Mary Cascone, town historian, to give us a presentation on on our very favorite green area here in the village, the Argyle Lake. This is Mary's third presentation for us. So thanks for coming back again, Mary, and sharing all your knowledge with us village residents. We really appreciate it. We're really fond here at the Conklin House of saying, it's so important for people to know the history of Babylon, that we have such a deep and rich history that lends itself to our little country village feel. So we really are very happy to be able to get out these tidbits of information. So with that, I would like to thank the Babylon Village Historical Society and thank Mrs. Cascone for coming out and joining us tonight. And I am going to turn the floor over to you, Mary. The format of our presentation, Mary speaks for about a half an hour. We ask everyone to just put your questions in the chat bar or hold them to the end. And then she takes some time at the end to answer all the questions that we have. She's very generous with her time. So welcome, Mary, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much. I will go ahead and share my screen. We're seeing you see the historic institutions, yes? Robin, you muted yourself, so I can't.
Oh, yes, I see them.
Thank you.
Sorry. There we go.
That's always my greatest fear, is that I start talking and then no one can hear me. Well, that's my second greatest fear. The first fear is that I'm going to forget everything I'm supposed to say. But yes, I do like to start off, as Robin was talking about. We have three great historic institutions in the Village of Babylon: the Conklin House, the Babylon Village Historical Society, and the Town of Babylon History Museum, which coincidentally just happen to be the three buildings in the village that are all in the National Register of Historic Places. And this is Argyle Park, Part 2, Defunct Hotel to Village Green. And I just chuckled so much when I found this, because I wanted to answer a question from last month's program. Someone was asking about the streets in Argyle Park and why they were so named. So, of course, I found this nice little caricature of the 8th Duke of Argyle. Had to share him. And this is the explanation. All of the streets in Argyle Park, the residential area, are related to Scotland. Okay, as in the Duke of Argyle. So Caledonia being a Latin name used by the Roman Empire that described Scotland. It's sometimes described as like the romantic name for Scotland. Cameron, Douglas, Dundee, these are all clans, Scottish clans. Oh, I'm sorry, no, Dundee is a city. The Highlands, the Scottish Highlands. Lichfield Avenue predates the Argyle Hotel. We talked about the Litchfields last time. Montrose is a Scottish town, and Stuart is, again, a Scottish clan. Also the House of Stuart, another Mary, Queen of Scots. So I'm glad that somebody asked that question, because once I looked for it, it just all made sense. So I hope that helps. So we're going back to the Argyle Hotel, and last time we left off with, me and this picture of the royal baking powder. And I was like, you have to come back to find out what it has to do with. So there's your old metal can on the left. The one on the right is more of a modern one. It's very meta to have a picture of a can on the can that also has a picture of the can. You're not going to be able to unsee it from now on. But here's what it has to do with Babylon. This gentleman, this luxuriously mustached gentleman, William Ziegler Sr. As a young man, he went to work in a drugstore. He later studies chemistry and pharmacy. Remember, your pharmacists or your chemists, they made up those headache remedies and things like that. So instead of going in and asking for an aspirin, you might want to shop between the different pharmacies. And I'm thinking about the ones that were here in Babylon Village. They had their own combinations. They weren't all doctors, but they tended to study chemistry. So he becomes an agent of the Royal Chemical Company. He gets married when he's he's 43. And in 1888, he sells his shares of Royal Chemical, this company that he's worked for 20 years. He sells his shares for $4 million, takes that money and purchases the Price Baking Powder Company and Tartar Chemical in New Jersey. A couple of years later, he also purchases the Argyle Hotel. And that same year, he adopts the son of his half-brother, a baby that he and his wife named William Ziegler Jr. In 1899, progressing on, he combines these 3 baking powder companies that he has into the Royal Baking Powder Company of New Jersey. He also gets interested in exploring the Arctic. He funded many expeditions to the Arctic, and then he dies in 1905. But let's go back a little bit. So we go back to 1891. Okay, this is only 9 years after the Argyle Hotel has been in business. In the South Side Signal that May, they're applauding Mr. Ziegler's purchase of the hotel. In June, they announced that the hotel was painted and newly renovated for the season, and it opened June 27th, 1891 for the season. Apparently, it was a really bad week because come July 7th, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle is describing the horrific customer service and everything else that was happening at the hotel. And I just took the top paragraph or a part of the paragraph from this article. And they're describing Mr. Ziegler, the Brooklyn millionaire, who's proved his ability in a great many different directions. But they describe this formerly famous saying among Americans that, quote, he's a mighty smart man, but he can't keep a hotel. Now, I Googled this. If this was a truly famous saying somewhere in America, it hasn't made it to the internet. They say that Mr. Ziegler himself has attempted, all kinds of tasks, but this one is not working out for him. It was not a good start. That same year, so just a week later, what's also being put into the newspaper is that Mr. Ziegler is selling the villa sites, which really just means a home site or a home lot. You may have seen this in other things. When they say that they're selling 300 villa sites, it means 300 lots, but you probably needed at least 4 lots to put a house on. So it makes it sound like there's a lot, but it doesn't mean that they intended for 300 houses. We see this in Lindenhurst and other areas during the same time. So it's a little misleading. But the cottages that they're talking about are the ones in the map, the ones that the hotel had built for people to rent out for the season. All right, so that was his first year. He's come in. His intention is to keep the hotel going, but he wants to sell the properties or the existing structures. So this is what happens in his first couple of years. After that start, this is 1 per year. 1892, okay, it's open. The manager is Mr. Duryea. The owner was Mr. Ziegler, but then someone leases the hotel and they manage it. And then, they share the profits. So Mr. Ziegler wasn't there for the day-to-day management. In 93, they're saying, hey, we're going to open under the same management, but we're reducing the prices from last season. You get to 1894, we're open, but it's under new management. It's Mr. Rogers, okay? And you can see here that they're saying their New York office is at the St. James Hotel. So instead of corresponding with Babylon to secure your reservation, if you're already in New York City, you just go down to the St. James Hotel, and you make your reservation for the summer. Again, in 1895, they're talking about all of their great amenities. 1896, they're profiled in Brooklyn Life, pretty much the society magazine for Brooklyn. And remember, Brooklyn still was not part of New York City at this point. It was its own city at the end of the 1890s. 1897, the Argyle closes. Now, They blame it on the weather. They say the bad weather of the past 10 days has caused the management to close the hotel. But then what comes along later next week, they describe how the Argyle closed because Mr. and Mrs. Edwards were having trouble. Mr. Edwards was the manager of the hotel. But actually it was Mrs. Edwards' money that went into this. Apparently she's suing her husband for squandering their money. So yeah, a bad marital relationship kind of helped bring it down, but we can't completely blame it on the Edwards because it was obviously going down as it was. Well, let's see. Oh, here we go. 1900, somebody else again, Hendy and Reardon, they give it a go. It says right there, under new management, accommodates, I think it says 300 guests. It says it fronts on the Great South Bay, which is a little bit misleading, but I'm sure that the view from the top was beautiful. It would be the last time that someone tried to run the hotel, because in 1904, as it says, Argyle Hotel doomed, that the demolition will begin this week. So I want to give you an excerpt from this article in 1904. And they do describe that the hotel was never a success from a financial standpoint, despite the fact that every effort was made to render it popular. If you remember from back in February, we talked about one of the things that they did to make the place popular was entertain the guests with baseball games, hence the Cuban Giants. They do talk about how, after the property was sold to Mr. Ziegler, he sold the cottages at auction, as we saw, but he retained the hotel, the casino, and the lake. That there had been a number of managers, and there was even a large military school on the Hudson that had considered coming and using the hotel as their new school, but that deal fell through. So we kind of knew that the hotel had never been a great financial success. It was built to a very high end, but then what happens is that as we get into the 1890s, if you have the kind of money to come and stay at the Argyle Hotel, you probably have the kind of money to go just about anywhere else. The idea of traveling to Florida, traveling to South Carolina, perhaps taking a ship to Europe, all of these things start to become more and more reasonable for people. Babylon was still an attraction. It still is, our proximity to the water, but it just wasn't the right fit anymore. And there were so many other hotels. So after that 1904 demolition date, it goes from, the view from the falls, goes from what we see on the left, where you can see the hotel in the background, to the view on the right, where what you can see from that same view are some of the cottages. And as we talked about before, they really dismantled the hotel. A lot of the wood, tiles, things like that went in to build other structures, not just in Argyle Park, but supposedly around the community. The year after the hotel is brought down, Mr. Ziegler dies. But they rest assured, as the New York Times says, don't worry, the Arctic search goes on despite the fact that he's passed away. He grows up from being the son of a Pennsylvania farmer to making a fortune in baking powder. There's Mr. Ziegler looking all dapper in his suit. And this is what the hotel property goes from. So there are only a few atlases of Western Suffolk County that really detail the streets. And as we see here and we've seen before, it goes in 1902 and 1915 are the two maps that we have. So you can see the hotel is up there just south of the railroad, and then the next time we see it in the 1915 map, the hotel is gone. And really, it just extended Cameron Avenue across. They extended Argyle to make more building lots. So if you remember, his adopted son, who became his heir, and his namesake, William Ziegler Jr., When his father died in 1905, he was just 14 years old. And as we can see here, in 1912, when he became 21 of age, he became a co-executor of the estate that he inherited from his father. But now that he was 28 years old, he was going to be in full possession of the estate left by his father. $13 million 100 years ago was a nice piece of money. And just a couple months later, what do we see? But again, he's selling off lots. Now, if you remember the 300 lots that his father was selling in 1891, here they're talking about 71 lots. So you can see they had sold a lot of building lots. They had 3 dwellings, and now they were selling off the casino as well. So that but they still own the lake. All right. So now that was 1919. Now we're in 1921. Newspapers from, New York City to Babylon are running these headlines: Argyle Lakes, gift to Babylon by an anonymous donor. It's going to be presented to the village for park purposes, no restrictions. Lots of excitement. And this is what happens, is that the agent, Jeremiah Robbins, goes to the village board meeting and says, hey, my employer wants to give this to the village. Of course, they say yes. Okay, very smart of them. But this anonymous idea does not last long, because who's the richest person in town who can afford to be, so generous? Turns out to be J. Stanley Foster. And as it says here, it turns out J. Stanley Foster, president of the Bowery Savings Bank and a longtime resident of Babylon, is the man who gave the village of Babylon the park, Argyle Lakes, and surrounding land. So who is Mr. Foster? There were at least 3 generations of the Foster family, which does include the Dodds as well, that lived in Babylon. They were largely on the east side of Little East Neck Road, on the south side of Main Street, but I'm not going to say that they were limited to that area. What started out as, the grandfather's estate slowly gets broken up for children and grandchildren. This was J. Stanley's house on Little East Neck Road. He did marry, he married once. And sorry, unfortunately, his wife ran away with the chauffeur. And this was the house that he built for the 2 of them to live in. And it's my understanding that after she left, he really wasn't interested in living there. But being a bachelor, I'm sure that he could go anywhere he wanted. He was the 3rd president of the Bowery Bank. It had been started by his grandfather, William Foster. And right there in the middle, that is his grandfather, William, and his grandmother, Harriet's obelisk in Babylon Cemetery. If I'm not mistaken, it is the tallest monument in Babylon Cemetery. Not too bad for, probably one of the richest men that had lived here. He stuck his monument right in the middle of the cemetery. You can't miss it. His son, who had been John Strong Foster, J. Stanley's father, was the 2nd president of the bank. Must be nice to inherit a bank. And contrary to popular belief, it gets confusing. His real name was J-A-Y, but because his father was John Strong Foster, he and his father had same initials. So sometimes people think that he was a junior. It gets a little bit confusing, but they had different names. Excuse me. And John S. Foster is the one who paid for, or largely paid for, the Methodist Church that we see here on the right. That they gifted money to the Methodist Church for the structure that is largely there today. I mean, of course, it has a new front. I think it has a handicap entrance there, but it is the one on the corner of Deer Park Avenue and James Street. This here is the only picture I've ever been able to find of J. Stanley. It's not great. It looks a little haunting. It happens to be taken from his passport application in 1923. He, I think it's a Columbia University that he attended, but every yearbook that I've been able to find is just like 1 year off from when he was there. But just because I can only find one picture of him, we find him throughout the newspaper. He had already been in the New York National Guard before World War I. And then when he was called up, he never left the country, as we can see here, because there'd be all these notes about the soldiers and what they were doing. It would appear in the local newspaper, the Southside Signal. He was in Texas. But as had happened throughout his life, he was in poor health and he was sent home. He was honorably discharged. So this is pretty much an image. It's a bit earlier than when J. Stanley would have given it to the village. I do love a color, like a hand-colored postcard. We can't always trust what's in them because sometimes they draw in people, but I thought that this was a really beautiful view. Again, here's the wood. This is what it would have looked like when J. Stanley gave it. And so at the end of 1922, the village has had it for a year now. The village board elected to name the park Babylon Memorial Park. And here, this is right from the newspaper, that they would put a sign there that said Babylon Memorial Park, given in memory of those who served in the World War by J. Stanley Foster. Of course, we hadn't had World War II yet, so of course it's not called World War I. But yes, this was his intention, was to give the park to honor his fellow veterans. And so even though we all know it as Argyle Park, technically it's Babylon Memorial Park, and we see that occasionally on old postcards. Another view of the wooden overflow. And I really, until I was getting ready for this presentation, I had passed by this picture so many times. And then I looked at it and said, the three bridges. And so here's a blow up of it. And this is really being taken from the northwest side. And yeah, those are the three overflows, basically, and the walkaway around. It's changed a little bit over time, but that's the view. So we see Main Street and some of the houses that were on the south side of Main Street. This is another interesting view. On the left, we're standing on the west side of the pool, looking east, and we can see the wooden overflows on the left, and Main Street is on the right. It's extremely green, but I liked this view. There's a lot of trees in the way, and you think that it's nothing, but then you start to see the details of the path. So again, Mr. Foster comes into the picture just a couple of years later in 1924. He did not give the municipal building. He gave $15,000 to the village so that they could buy the property that sits there. Apparently what was happening earlier in that year is that there was a proposal to build the village hall on a lot on Deer Park Avenue. And Mr. Foster, wrote to the village saying, I really disagree. That's going to be a terrible place. It's going to be too congested. And then he follows it up a week later by saying, you know what, if you want that piece of property at Carl and Main Street, I'll give you $15,000 towards it, as long as you start your building project within 18 months. So that, and that's fairly common. The same thing happened at Old Town Hall, where the Sammis family they already owned the piece of land where the town hall ended up being built. But they did say, if you don't start building that town hall within 2 years, we get it back. It's a fairly smart thing to do, because the municipalities still have to go back to the voters and get the money to build the building. It's now at a reduced cost because you don't have to buy the land, but yeah, it was a wise thing to do, and thank goodness we have these buildings, because it is not it really isn't a village hall. It's a municipal building because it is both a fire department and the village hall offices. So J. Stanley Foster doesn't live to see the municipal building go up. He gives the money in 24, he dies in 25, and the building was dedicated in 26. You know, these are some of the headlines that are there. You know, locally, it's J.S. Foster, donor of Memorial Park and Firehouse site, dies. This is how he was known here, and that's his headstone in Babylon Rural Cemetery. He's right there in these two great rows of family members that face one another. It's kind of like walking into their dining room, and everybody's just kind of like seated at the table. It's nicely done, but far more understated than his grandfather's great big obelisk on the south side of the cemetery. So in comes his sister. This is Carolyn. She was born in 1866, and when she was just 6 years old, her widowed mother, her father had passed away, Carolyn Thompson married John Strong Foster. And her little brother, J. Stanley, was born in 1877. So 11 years difference, but they were the only siblings in the family. And she's buried just across from those two rows that I was describing. She's also there in Babylon Rural Cemetery. It is her fondness for her brother that brings the next gift to the village. In 1928, she committed a cost of $25,000 to provide a decorative overflow to beautify the park that her brother had given to the village. And this was the design that appeared in the newspaper. Looks like what we ended up with. It was designed by John H. Phillips. He was a New York City architect. He also had a home here in Babylon. He designed the original Capitol Theater, and that's what we're seeing there in the picture on the upper right. That is the Argyle Theater. No, it doesn't look like that anymore. The theater had two fires, the second of which led to that yellow brick facade that we know of today. But this is what it looked like earlier. That was John Phillips' design. And he had also done the original Lutheran church that had been on Locust Avenue. They, in 1928, they really got working on this. I'll go back for a second. She offers it in June, and by October, they're ready to dedicate this new overflow on Armistice Day, which we now know as Veterans Day. And the bench centered behind the overflow is inscribed. It painted several times, but you can still see Babylon Memorial Park, presented to the village of Babylon by J. Stanley Foster, Esquire. And these are a couple of other pictures that confuse me. I added these on here. You can see this is called Pond Lilies, and it's the same picture. Many times, there are two different publications of this postcard in black and white, which is what you see on the right, which is really kind of dull. And I'm glad that they did, do a hand color treatment on it, but I'm not quite sure where that's supposed to be. And then this other one, these are not the most inspiring postcards. They just look like a lot of scrub brush and stuff with just dark, dirty water. But we can remember the island that was in the middle of the pond. But I do like this one. This one that kind of shows the walkway around the lake. We will recognize the boathouse that's over there. We saw that in some of the pictures of the hotel. And I think there's one more. Yeah, this one in particular, I kind of like that they left the ruts in the pathway. It kind of shows you that they didn't, gloss over everything. And this was the kind of postcard you sent to people when you came to stay in Babylon for a short time, and you wanted to show all your friends what you'd been up to. So that is Argyle Park, from Defunct Hotel to Village Green. Thanks for listening.
Well, thanks, Mary. That was a lot of information that you just presented.
That's what I do.
Where you come up with all this stuff, I'm just amazed every time I listen to you, and how you connect all the dots of the different players in various points of history in time. So at this point, I'm going to ask anybody who'd like to ask a question. There's a couple of questions in the chat bar I'm going to ask right away, but anybody else who'd like to ask a question is free to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and join us in the conversation here. So Mary, my first question goes back to your very first slide. When you have the 3 buildings, I know the Conklin house is on the historic registry. Are there many other buildings in the village that are on the historic registry?
Those are the only 3.
The only 3?
Yes.
Wow.
And the Conklin house was first. It was, I think, 1988. Old Town Hall went on in 2005. And the library, which is the Historical Society's building, was only like 2015.
Wow. Okay.
So that one's pretty new. Yeah.
So there are no residential houses that are on the historic registry?
Not yet. And there's only one in the town of Babylon. There is a home in Amityville Village.
Gotcha. Okay. So Ellen had a question. Was Caroline Oakley Thompson part of the Oakley family on the east side of the village?
Possibly. I'd have to look into that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she also said, thank you very much. She was the one who had the question about the street names in the Argyle, which I think is fascinating for anybody who lives in the Argyle to really know the history of your street name.
I actually keep a spreadsheet. It has over 2,500 lines in it, and it's every street in the town of Babylon. And every time we figure out why one was so named, we put that information in there. So I have to do that tomorrow. But every Oak Street that you have could be named for a different reason,
right?
So
right. So Lynn asked, what year was the fire at the Capitol Theater?
1950s. For a better answer, you have to look for the Babylon Village book, which I'm going to try and pull up. I'm going to get that answer.
Okay.
What's your next one?
Well, so while you're working on that, I had a question about the Argyle Lake, because do you know if that lake is man-made, or is it a natural lake?
It's a natural lake. It's part of the Coral River, which we looked at the last time. But the shape of it right now, I can't say for certain. The edges. There was the paper mill that was there in the mid 1800s, so that definitely they would have dammed it up for that. Perhaps that helped contribute to the spreading of the water. Mm-hmm. But there's been human influence on it, but it's a natural one.
Interesting. Somebody, Samsung, I don't know who it is, but you can feel free to unmute yourself, said she found a royal baking powder cookbook from 1888.
Oh, that's cool. That is very cool. I think that we need a decree that, like any Babylon Village function, that the cakes have to be made with royal baking powder. I don't know how well that would go over, but okay. I have the answer on the. Mm-hmm. I have the answer on the fire. Okay, it suffered a fire in 1944 and then again in 1955. The one in 55 was actually a fire was caused by the mechanics in the stage curtains, and but with the fire and the new face on it came air conditioning. So it didn't have that before.
Gotcha. All right. Do we, I did see that you mentioned one of the managers at the Argyle Hotel was a Duryea, and we have a Patty Duryea at Village Hall. She's an employee up in the mayor's office. So I wonder if there's any relation there.
Well, and then there was
Unusual
another Duryea who was the third Babylon town supervisor, and he had been in the hotel business. I haven't looked up to see if there's any relationship there.
Mary, what year was the village incorporated? Is it 1893? No.
Yes.
So would that have been when the first village government was established? When our first, it seems to be just around the time of the Argyle Hotel.
Yeah, the vote to create the incorporated village took place in either November or December of 1893, and then it was in January that they voted in the first village board. And the first, he wasn't a mayor; he was known as a president. But Dr. Hewlett, whose house was right next door to mine. In fact, if I open up this window shade, I can look at his house right there. Yeah, when you can, people have got to go in and see the fellows on the wall and admire, their facial grooming and stuff like that. I used to tell Mayor Scordino that I really appreciated his historically mayoral mustache because it fit in. After all of these, clean shaven faces, he went back to those original, nice mustaches.
Yeah, I don't think our new mayor will be carrying on that.
No, I don't encourage her to do that.
Oh, terrific. Well, does anybody else have any additional questions for Mary Cascone, our town historian and our local wealth of knowledge of all things history in the town of Babylon, but also the village of Babylon? Mary, I will like to say that I know we haven't planned the next topic yet, but we'd be so thrilled to welcome you back. I really enjoy these evenings with you. I feel like we're all sitting around the fire together and talking history shop.
Yes, well, and thank you for the opportunity because I hope I don't get lost here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. I was getting a signal that said my internet was unstable. I really went after researching Argyle Park because we only ever heard about Mr. Litchfield, and then we heard about Mr. Corbin, and then we heard about Mr. Foster. And we missed all of these people in between. And we missed all the times when it was their wives who had money. And, there's always so much more to the story, and we have to go back. And that's what I really enjoy, is putting those pieces together and finding the things that we've long forgotten about, because it's right there in front of us. And I got to say, Babylon Village is just so... I want to say that at this point, I call it easy to research because you say to yourself, oh yeah, Carolyn Oakley Thompson. We've seen Oakleys before. I wonder if she's related.
Right.
The Thompsons. And I must congratulate the library for continuing to maintain a wonderful microfilm machine. Every time I go in, I see that it was donated in 2009 by the Friends of the Library. Every time we write a book, we put in the acknowledgements, thanks to the library, because they are maintaining one of the best microfilm machines in the area. And they help with this because sometimes we don't have it physically. And when you can just walk in there and say hello to the librarians and get to it and print out your stuff, it's a beautiful thing.
We're so lucky here in the village. Yes. And I can imagine the next time I take a stroll around Argyle Lake, all these characters that you have portrayed here today, they will definitely be rolling around in my head as yes. It's not just a walk around the lake anymore. It's like a stroll back through history, back through time.
Yep. People have been walking around that lake for a long time.
So Samsung, I'm sorry to refer to you as Samsung, but that's how your name comes up. Said she would like to send in cookbook pics and recipes to you, Mary.
Oh, thank you. I can't. All right, I got to stop sharing so maybe I can access the chat. I will put in my office email.
Yeah, does anybody, while we're here, does anybody have a suggestion for the next topic that they'd like to see covered? You could throw it up in the chat now. There's so much history here in the village of Babylon. It's deep. It goes deep.
Yes.
So thanks for joining us tonight, Mary, Melanie,
Thank you.
Rita, Al. I see a bunch of familiar faces out there. Mrs. Tice, thanks for joining us tonight. And Judy and Carolyn, Annette, Sue Harris, thanks for joining. I'm going to cut you loose, Mary. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And everybody keep an eye out or
Thank
ear
you.
out for our next presentation. If we can finagle Mary to come back again and give us some more history.
All right. Thank you. So nice to see you.
Evening.